before Greece had philosophers, before Rome had legions, before the word empire existed in most languages, Iran was already ancient. Priests had already lit fires that would burn, in one form or another, for 5,000 years. Iran has been invaded by Macedonians, Arabs, Mongols, and Turks, burned, divided, and reborn. And yet, its language survived, its poetry survived, its fire survived. This is the story of one of humanity's oldest and most resilient civilizations. The first flame, Elam and the dawn of civilization. 3000 BC. The land now called Iran did not begin with kings. It began with water. Along the banks of the Karun River, in the plains of what is today Khuzestan, a civilization was forming in the mud. The Elamites, one of the world's first literate peoples, were inscribing their language onto clay tablets before most of the world had invented writing at all. Their ziggurat at Choha-Zanbil still stands today, a stepped tower rising from 4,000 years of dust, as though someone had pressed pause mid-construction and simply walked away. Elam was not a footnote, it was a power. It traded with Mesopotamia, waged war against Babylon, and developed legal codes, art, and urban life at a time when Europe was still arranged around campfires. To the north and east, on the Iranian plateau, semi-nomadic tribes were moving and settling. Among them, two would define the coming millennium, the Medes and the Persians. They spoke Proto-Iranian languages, herded horses across the highlands, and venerated fire as the most sacred of all forces. That fire would become the beating heart of everything they were about to build. Necho. The Median Kingdom and the Persian tribes, 700–550 BC, it is 612 BC. The greatest city in the ancient world is burning. Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire, terror of nations, has just fallen. The army that brought it down was led by Iranians, the Medes. Under their king Cyaxares, they had done what no one had managed for generations. They had broken Assyria. They had changed the map of the world. The Median kingdom stretched from Anatolia to the edge of Central Asia. Their capital Ecbatana was described by ancient sources as ringed by 7 concentric walls, painted different colors, a staircase to the sky. Beneath Median dominance, a related tribe was growing. The Persians, settled in the southern region of Anshan, were nominally vassals of the Medes. But one man among them was about to make the entire world forget which tribe had come first. His name was Cyrus. Third, Cyrus the Great and the Achaemenid Empire, 550–330 BC. It is 539 BC. The walls of Babylon have just opened, not by force, by choice, and the man who walks through them does something no conqueror before him had ever done. He does not burn the temples. He does not enslave the people. He lets them go home. Cyrus II of Persia was a conqueror unlike any before him. He defeated the Medes, the Lydians, and the Babylonians in rapid succession, assembling the largest empire the world had yet seen. But he ruled not through terror, as the Assyrians had, but through tolerance. The exiled Jews of Babylon were freed. Their sacred objects returned. Their priests permitted to rebuild in Jerusalem. This policy was inscribed on a small clay cylinder, the Cyrus cylinder, buried in Babylonian soil for 2.5 millennia. When archaeologists found it in 1879, they discovered what some scholars would call one of the earliest declarations of human rights in recorded history. The cylinder, the fire. These were not just objects, they were ideas, and ideas are the one thing no invader can burn. Under Darius the Great, the empire expanded to its peak, stretching from Greece to the Indus. Darius built the Royal Road, a 2,700-kilometer highway connecting the empire's extremities, with a postal relay so efficient, messages traveled its full length in days. At Persepolis, delegations from every nation brought tribute and were carved into stone not as conquered slaves, but as participants, walking upright, free. IV. Alexander and the Seleucid Shadow, 330–47 BC. And then it ended. Alexander of Macedon crossed into Persian territory in 334 BC, and within 6 years, the Achaemenid Empire was gone. At Persepolis, Alexander did something he would spend the rest of his life explaining. He burned it. The palace of the great kings, the treasury of the world, reduced to ash in a single night. Here is the paradox of Alexander. He destroyed what he most admired. He wore Persian robes. He adopted Persian court ceremonies. He called himself King of Kings, the Achaemenid title, not in mockery, but because he wanted to become it. He had conquered Persia, and Persia had conquered him. After Alexander's death, his generals carved the empire apart. Iran passed to Seleucus I. Greek colonists flooded Iranian cities. Greek temples rose over Persian foundations. But beneath the surface, Iran was not Greek. The Persian language survived, spoken in homes, in markets, in poetry, told when the administrators weren't listening. Identity is not a building. You cannot burn it down. The Parthian Empire, Rome's nightmare, 247 BC, 224 AD. From the steppes of northeastern Iran, a tribe called the Pani swept down and rebuilt an Iranian empire from nothing. The Parthians were not bureaucrats, they were horsemen. Their signature move, the Parthian shot, firing arrows backwards from a galloping horse, became so famous we still use the phrase today. For nearly 5 centuries, the Parthian Empire stood as Rome's great eastern rival. At Carrhae in 53 BC, Roman legions met Parthian cataphracts and horse archers and suffered one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history. Marcus Crassus, co-ruler of Rome, the richest man in the Republic, was killed. The shock echoed through Rome for generations. The Parthians preserved Iranian traditions, Zoroastrianism, the Persian language, the memory of Cyrus, while absorbing Greek artistic styles and Mesopotamian practices. They survived by being flexible, but flexibility has a cost. By the 3rd century AD, exhausted by Roman wars and internal rebellions, a new dynasty was rising from Persia's ancient heartland, one that intended to burn away everything that wasn't purely Iranian. 6. The Sassanid Empire and the Last Great War, 224-651 AD, Shah did not think of himself as a rebel. He thought of himself as a restorer. When he defeated the last Parthian king in 224 AD, he was explicitly invoking the ghost of Cyrus, the memory of a pure, centralized, gloriously Iranian empire. The Sassanids he founded would last 400 years. Zoroastrianism became the state religion. Persian art, music, and literature flourished. The world's first hospital is said to have been built at Gondeshapur, alongside an academy gathering Greek, Indian, and Persian scholars under one roof. And then there was Byzantium. For over a century, Sassanids and Byzantines fought a civilization-consuming conflict that bled both empires dry. By 628 AD, Sassanid armies had briefly captured Jerusalem and Alexandria. Then the tide turned. A Byzantine counterattack shattered Persian momentum. The Sassanid king was assassinated by his own son. The empire had no time to recover. From the Arabian Peninsula, something no one had anticipated was already moving north. 7th, the Islamic Conquest and the Persian Phoenix, 632-900 AD. The armies that crossed into Sassanid Persia in the 630s were not large, they were not rich, but they carried absolute conviction. At Al-Qadisiyah in 636 AD, Arab Muslim forces defeated the Sassanid army. At Nahavand in 642, they broke it permanently. The last Sassanid Shah fled east and was murdered by his own servants. What followed was unlike anything in Iranian history. The language changed, the religion changed, the calendar changed. Zoroastrianism receded. Arabic became the language of scholarship and prayer. And yet Iran did not disappear, it transformed. Persian-speaking scholars became the architects of Islamic civilization itself. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, wrote in Arabic but thought in Persian frameworks. Al-Biruni, Rumi. These were not a defeated people dragged into a foreign culture. They were a civilization so vital it absorbed the conqueror's religion and made it more sophisticated than it had ever been. By the 9th century, the Persian language was coming back, not as a curiosity, but as a force. The Samanid dynasty declared Persian their court language. Ferdowsi began composing his Shahnameh, a 60,000-line epic that would carry Iranian memory across every future invasion. When no fire could survive, The words would. 8. The Seljuks, the Golden Age, and the Mongol Apocalypse, 1300 AD. The Islamic Golden Age, that extraordinary bloom of science, mathematics, and philosophy, was in significant part an Iranian achievement wearing Arabic clothes. When the Seljuk Turks arrived from Central Asia in the 11th century, the pattern repeated. Conquerors arrived with armies, Iran conquered them with culture. Within a generation, the Seljuk courts were speaking Persian. Omar Khayyam wrote poetry and mathematics under Seljuk patronage in an entirely Iranian voice. Then came the Mongols. What they did to Iran between 1219 and 1258 is almost impossible to describe without reaching for the language of apocalypse, because that is exactly the language the survivors used. Nishapur, one of the medieval world's greatest cities, was reduced to a field of skulls. Merv was slaughtered. Isfahan, Herat, Ray, ancient cities whose names echo through centuries of poetry, were burned and emptied. The great irrigation networks that had fed Iranian civilization for 4,000 years were destroyed. The population collapsed. Libraries burned in days that had been assembled over centuries. Yet the Mongol descendants converted to Islam. They became patrons of Persian art. They rebuilt what their grandfathers had destroyed. The fire, buried under ash, found oxygen again. 9. The Safavid Empire and the birth of modern Iran, 1501–1736 AD. It is 1501. A 16-year-old boy has just captured Tabriz and declared himself Shah. His name is Ismail Thafuamaor, Sufi mystic, poet, military genius, and he is about to make a decision that will define Iran for the next 500 years. Ismail declared Twelver Shia Islam the official religion of Iran. In a predominantly Sunni region, this was not theological preference. It was a declaration of identity, a deliberate, defiant differentiation from the Ottoman Empire to the west. Iran would be Shia, distinctly, irreducibly, permanently. After centuries of conquest and fragmentation, Iran had a border, not just geographic, but spiritual. Under Shah Abbas I, who came to the throne in 1588, the Safavid Empire reached its zenith. Abbas reformed the army, rebuilt the bureaucracy, welcomed European diplomats, and transformed Isfahan into one of the most beautiful cities on earth. The great Naqsh Jahan Square, surrounded by the Sheikh Lotfollah Mosque, the Ali Kapu Palace, and the Shah Mosque, is still considered among the finest ensembles of Islamic architecture ever built. Travelers arriving in 17th century Isfahan reported they had never seen anything like it. The carpets were among the greatest textile achievements in human history. The poets were everywhere. Decline, colonialism, and the Constitutional Revolution, 1700s–1900s. The Safavid Dynasty weakened after Abbas. The Afghans invaded. A military adventurer, Nader Shah, briefly hammered Iran back together by force, even sacking the Mughal treasury in Delhi. But his empire died with him. The Qajar dynasty that followed ruled a weakened Iran at the worst possible historical moment. The age of European imperialism. Britain and Russia treated Iran as a chessboard in their great game. Concessions were sold or extracted under duress. Russian troops occupied the north. British influence dominated the south. Then oil was discovered. In 1908, the first major Middle Eastern oil strike hit at Masjed Soliman. The British, through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, moved to secure exclusive rights. The sacred fire that had burned in Zoroastrian temples as a metaphor of divinity was now burning in refineries that enriched London, while Iran received royalties amounting to exploitation. And yet, in 1905, something unprecedented happened. Merchants, clerics, intellectuals, and women rose together and demanded a constitution. The Constitutional Revolution produced the first parliament in Iranian history, the Majlis. For the first time in 5,000 years, governance was not the sole property of a king. The flame of democratic aspiration, lit inside a country still being carved up by foreign powers, would never fully go out. Xerxes, the Pahlavi era, Mossadegh and the Revolution, 1921–1979, Reza Khan seized power in 1921 and declared himself Shah by 1925, founder of the Pahlavi Dynasty. His model was Ataturk's Turkey, secular, nationalist, forcibly modernized. His son Mohammad Reza Shah inherited the throne in 1941 after British and Soviet forces occupied Iran and removed his father. Mohammad Mossadegh was a lawyer, a Democrat, and a man who believed, with the devastating sincerity of someone who has read too much history, that Iran's oil belonged to Iranians. Elected prime minister in 1951, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. In 1953, in a joint CIA-British intelligence operation, he was overthrown. Arrested, sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life, the coup made a wound in Iranian political memory that never healed. For the next generation, every time an Iranian asked why their country was not free, the answer was the same. Because in 1953, the Americans came and took it away. The Shah ruled for 26 more years, modernizing infrastructure, expanding education, giving women the right to vote, and running a secret police, Safavid, that tortured dissidents. He suppressed both the left and the religious establishment. By 1979, the contradiction had become unbearable. Students, Marxists, religious conservatives, and nationalists found they shared one goal. In January 1979, Mohammad Reza Shah boarded a plane and left Iran forever. Deceived, the Islamic Republic and the long echo, 1979 present. The man who stepped off the plane in Tehran on February 1, 1979, had been living in exile for 15 years. Ayatollah Khamenei was 76 years old, his face impassive as the enormous crowd below screamed his name. His theory of Islamic governance, Velayat-e-Faqih, became the architecture of a new state within months. The Islamic Republic was not what most of the revolution's participants had imagined. The left was suppressed, women's rights were rolled back, thousands were imprisoned. The hostage crisis shattered Iran's relationship with the West permanently. Then Iraq invaded in 1980. 8 years of industrial warfare, trenches and chemical weapons followed. Perhaps 500,000 Iranians died. The revolution had promised liberation. The Republic delivered war. And yet Iran survived. The poets were still there. The language was still there. Young Iranians born after the revolution marched through the streets of Tehran in 2009, holding green scarves above their heads, demanding something older than any republic, dignity and the right to define themselves. Outro: the eternal fire stand at Persepolis today, and look at what the fire left behind. The great columns still rise, the carved delegations of 100 nations still process across the stone, frozen mid-step, still bringing their offerings to a court that has been dust for 23 centuries. The words of Ferdowsi still circulate in Iranian households. The blue domes of Shah Abbas still hover over Isfahan, as though certain the sky beneath them is theirs. 5,000 years of invasion, fire, and resurrection. The Greeks came, the Arabs came, the Mongols came, the British and the Americans came. Every one of them left something behind, and Iran absorbed it, metabolized it, and returned to itself. Changed, yes, enriched, yes, scarred, certainly, but itself. What does a civilization that has never been truly conquered look like? It looks like a people who never forgot their language when it was banned, who turned every conqueror's court into a Persian literary salon within a generation, who buried their sacred fires during invasions and relit them when the soldiers left, who wrote such poetry about loss and beauty and time that even their conquerors wept reading it. The cylinder that Cyrus inscribed still exists. On it, in cuneiform scratched into clay nearly 3,000 years ago, is the oldest recorded argument that rulers owe their subjects mercy. That argument has never gone away. Iran is still here, still burning.